Idea of a sinner, like, is anybody who hasn't been able to reach God's mark, who has done something that hasn't reached, like, God's glorious, like, expectations to reach of what goodness is. So I think really, like, the idea of a sinner is relevant, but I think we kind of miss it in that it's everyone, like, it's everyone, but we kind of often box it into someone, like, to things that we socially are like, that's inappropriate, so that's not good enough. But like, I think it's more just like, when you think of it as God's measuring stick, not ours, it's everyone.
I mean, it says in the Bible we're all born into sin. We were created perfectly, but we were born into a sinful world. So I think defining sin is quite tough. Like I said before, God says no sin is too much, and so it says just too big, or no sin's too small. So I think we, in a sense, are sin, in the way we live our life. And I think, obviously Jesus is the only way out of sin. So I think defining a sin is very, very difficult.
I think it's too culturally defined, like what you're saying. Like, it's especially like what even some Christian people would perceive as someone as a sinner, is just really culturally what we think is like the bad people or the wrong people. Which, I think everyone's a sinner. It's really not. It's not as big of a thing as people make that to be.
Where, like, if you look at Sermon on the Mount, Jesus isn't so much talking about all these outward behaviours that we can put people into these categories of, but it's all about heart and attitudes.
In Jesus' time, a sinner was anyone whose society and religious leaders considered to be unclean and unworthy of social interaction. They were shunned because people thought that if they hung out with them, they'd become tarnished too. The religious leaders of the time made it very clear who was a sinner and who was actually worthy of God.
But then along came a guy called Jesus, and it's an understatement to say that he shook things up a little.
From the very beginning, Jesus was, in the eyes of Pharisees and other religious leaders, a total rebel. This was why they were so keen to get rid of him. Jesus was constantly speaking out against their man-made rituals, rules, and customs, stating that they were more about the traditions of humankind instead of teaching the Word of God.
Some of the things that Jesus did that were so radical included claiming to forgive sins, even though the common belief was that only God could do this.
Breaking the Sabbath.
Healing on the Sabbath.
Identifying himself as God, which was considered by many to be blasphemy.
Eating with people who were labelled sinners, such as tax collectors.
Never fasting.
And allowing a prostitute to bathe his feet.
The point that Jesus was trying to make with all of this was that he was always there for people who admitted they needed him, people that everyone else considered to be sinners.
The Pharisees and other religious leaders were self-righteous. They couldn't accept that they might be wrong. We can see this clearly in the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, where the tax collector was the one who went home right with God, not the religious leader who thought he knew it all.
So, what does this mean for us now, in the 21st century?
I don't know, I think the term rebel is like quite loaded with perceptions from like the last couple of hundred years. So there's a lot of connotations that come with it that I wouldn't necessarily attach to Jesus. But I think you could take it, you can take it in the way that he's countercultural. His way was God's way, not the way of the world. So I think in that way, I guess it was.
I would obviously, reading the Bible would obviously say I'd do a similar thing, but I mean, would I really do the similar thing? Like, would I really go, I would sit with tax collectors and sinners as well? In another sense, that's very humbling. In this society, I think it's tough.
Stuff like, I think that it's probably only been more recently that I've kind of understood more fully that there's so many things in the New Testament that Jesus did was actually like that we don't even read into and understand, but so many of them were him being like, no, you have placed like man-made boundaries on what was supposed to be God's, and you have put that in there, and
The Pharisees lived a certain way and taught a certain law, whereas God came and said, Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and life, whereas the law was the way and the truth. And I don't think I would be able to sort of do the same as Jesus. I'd love to say that I could be the same as Jesus, and I'd love to be able to be the same as Jesus, but it'd be hard. I think it'd be really, really tough.
While it may be initially tricky to relate to an event that happened 2,000 years ago, Jesus' message still stays strong today.
He's not interested in people who think they do the right things all the time. Instead, he's always there for people who need him and seek his guidance.
So what does this mean for you?